so much for asking. It talks back. This meeting is being recorded by, all right. Wait a minute. I have to approve. There we go. How's your day gone? Mine's been interesting. It's been an interesting couple of weeks for me. Thank you for allowing me to share with you about perforated paper needlework. You will find that perforated paper, the stitching in perforated paper is more like stitching on a needlepoint canvas than it is cross stitch. Most of the stitching was done with a long stitch or a half cross stitch or some other types of stitches. So I think you'll find it interesting. I started collecting perforated paper needlework or being interested in it in about the 1980s. I think that's when perforated paper came back again. And I saw this in a craft shop and thought, I have something like this at home that's very similar. What have I got? And I had a little family Bible bookmark that was in a family Bible. And I believe it was done by my great-grandmother. And I thought, well, the holes in this are a lot smaller, but it's the same thing. So that sparked my interest in perforated paper. So I've been collecting for a bit, and I firmly believe that you learn by seeing. So I hope that you will learn something you haven't seen, and you will learn something new tonight. Perforated paper was came around about 1840. It was a common material. It was easily affordable, and it could be used for cross stitch, for needlepoint, and other types of projects because you could cut it into shapes. And there's three categories of paper needlework. There's what I call the smalls, and their sort of heyday was 1840 to about 1880. Samplers, 1840 to about 1860, and the mottos, 1870 to about 1900. So there's three different groups. There were patterns for the smalls and some of the bookmarks in ladies' magazines. Perforated paper was very popular, and it's long been sort of ignored in a way because it came right after the samplers, which stopped about 1850, and then the Berlin work, the wools and the canvas from Germany came in about 1870. So it was right in that middle phase, and it gets skipped over a lot. It's called perforated cardboard, Bristol board, punched paper. It's sort of like building the pyramids. Could we build them now? And how come we can't? In 1800s, perforated paper was actually originally punched with about 24 holes per inch. And then as it got closer to 1900, there were less holes per inch, and there was a reason for that. And most of the bookmarks—
Wrong one.
Hello. Most of the bookmarks you see were stitched on blank paper. The samplers were always stitched on blank.
She is the speaker.
Does somebody have a question? Okay. You're not.
See it with that way shut down.
You're not muted. Shirley, can you mute them? Whoever they are.
It's Sandy. Jim's trying to do it.
Okay.
Just a minute.
Shirley maybe can mute you. Anyway.
I would have to exit this in order to mute her.
Okay, can I go?
I got her muted.
Okay, participants, it's Shirley. Okay, we just are here. All right. There we go. All right. So bookmarks were always done on blank paper. Samplers were done on blank paper, and the mottos, which had less holes per inch, were printed. So they discovered that you could print on paper, and that made it very popular to put designs on that people could stitch. And today we're fortunate to have 14 count paper, which we've had for a while, and 18 count paper has, that came back in last year in 2021. And I want to show you the difference in sizes. This Come Ye to the Waters probably was in a magazine. And you can see the patterns are very similar. They're about this difference in the size. Beads for the waters, wool, different textured stitches for the looks like a fountain. But you could do the same thing on different size paper. Okay, let's go back here. See what we can do. Right now, there we go. One of the things that is the most familiar are the bookmarks. There were a lot of bookmarks and a lot of different designs, and most of them survived because they were stuck inside something. So paper is pretty sturdy stuff, but it won't last if it gets wet, if it gets bent, if there's certain things it doesn't like. But there are a lot of bookmarks, and probably the bookmarks and the mottos are the things, if you've seen something stitched on antique paper, those are likely what you've seen. These are early ones. The Victorians like to do pressed paper things. My grandmother had a bunch of Valentines with like the stickers and different things in the middle and sayings with the pressed paper edge. These are early, so 1840 to about 1850. They had a really scallopy, flowy edge, and then somebody decided if you punched holes in the middle of it, you could stitch on it. And Tokens and Trifles, if you remember them, they were doing this about 10 years ago or a little bit before that. They sort of followed this format with a border edge and the holes in the middle. These are just fun. Look how delicate the punching is. I mean, they could really do a lot of different things. And you could put whatever design you wanted in there. You could put your, if you had a design, if you made something up, you could put a verse, you could put a name. These are early. 1860s, you had a little bit plainer, a little more plain bookmarks because people now were finding designs in magazines. And there were designs, and you can see I Bloom to Fade is one of my favorites these days. It's all done in wool. Most of these were done in cotton or wool. Not as many bookmarks were done in silk. I call this plain paper because, again, these are just pieces of paper that what they used to do is they would do your design, and then they might put a little decorative border around the edge, and a lot of them were placed on a ribbon. There were patterns, and for a collector, it's really fun when you can find a thing that's stitched and then find the pattern that it was stitched from. That actually doesn't happen often enough, but I was fortunate to find this Watch and Pray pattern, and you can see the bookmark on the left where it was stitched, the original pattern. The one in the I Will Guide Thee with Mine Eye is probably in a magazine, or there was a pattern for that. And then Peterson's magazine, which was a really popular ladies magazine, did have patterns for bookmarks. Sometimes the bookmark designs were not stitched as bookmarks. Sometimes they got put in the middle of something. You can see this design here, which is really pretty intricate. Search the scriptures. Somebody put this in the middle of a sampler stitched on paper and used that as a centerpiece with all these lovely Berlin work roses and things. And then you can see it up here on this little sampler. There was one school that they were a school for destitute girls, and they used bookmark patterns in their samplers. They didn't use alphabets, they didn't use the standard stuff. They used some of the bookmark patterns that you'll see here. And then sometimes people just made a sampler out of their bookmarks. And this is one that wasn't a school one. Somebody liked these, they put them all together on one piece of paper and did it that way. These are the Sudbury Hall samplers. You can see these are all designs originally intended for perforated paper. And since we can hardly ever find an original pattern, these were like, the first time I saw one of these, I went, this has to be a teacher's sample, or it has to be something, or because I knew it was bookmark designs, but it was stitched on fabric, and very, very tiny stitches on fabric. And they found out 20 years later, they used these, this was the format for their school samplers. But it's a great collector's, it's a great option to see the patterns that were available. In the 1870s, they had less holes per inch. So that means they could print on the paper. And they did, and they printed, somebody decided we could use advertising bookmarks. And so these are some examples of the bookmark. They had the store thing below and it had a sentiment on the top. This was a gimmick. They handed them out to their customers. Usually, like "Thou art my hope" in the bottom corner, usually what happened is they stitched the bookmark and they threw away the store advertisement. So even though there's a lot of them here, they're pretty rare because you usually don't find the both together. But that was another use for perforated paper. These are the smalls used for needlework. They're needlework related. There were needle books. There were pin keeps. This is a pin keep, double-sided pin keep. I was given this when I was told this was a scissors case. It could be a watch holder, but her initials are on the inside of this in beads on the underneath this cover. Stamp holders, baskets, little orc baskets, card baskets, all sorts of different things. And these would be in the category that I call smalls. Again, here are some more needle books. They didn't just stitch on them. They used to cut the paper out and layer it and put it in different layers. And so they built sort of like tramp art. This type of format looks a little bit like tramp art, where they just layer different pieces together and they held them in place with a stitch, sometimes with a bead. And again, here you see on the inside of this is the back side of this needle book, that they could cut a little decorative border. These are familiar too. You'll see these also, the little needle books on paper. Watch holders, pockets, and baskets. These survived if they were kept flat. The baskets didn't always survive because they're three-dimensional. So it depends on, what got thrown on top and how squished it ended up. This is a watch holder. We think this is all done in beads. So these are really heavy beads here, but it's really, really well done. Boxes, again, the same thing. If it gets too smushed, it doesn't really survive, but these are three different examples. This one, they had a little blue box. They dyed the paper or painted it blue, and then they put it inside the box, existing box. These two, they made their own box. And this one has the little needle pages on the inside. And this is the top, and this is the bottom. And then somebody made it for their mom in 1874. And this poor thing actually survived. And it has a nice piece of styrofoam in it right now because it's pretty fragile, but it was fun to see. Somebody kept that as a treasure because somebody made it for their mom and it came down in the family and ended up with me. But boxes were fun to do. Cases, some of these are just stunning. This is probably a glove case, what we can figure out. These fold back. This is the bottom of the glove case, and you can see how they fold. So these are this top two sides, this little thing that folds over. This is all ruched ribbon, little pocket around the edge. This is faded a bit. These are the original colors because it was in the bottom of the case. And then this is the same type of thing, not quite as elegant. This is a handkerchief case. So you could see you could cut paper into different shapes. And again, it's lined with silk with a little bag and little bows. I love these. I think that they're just stunning. More smalls. I love this one too. I love it all. Presented to Charity Olam, Thy Chart to Heaven, the Bible, by Charity Rathburn. So Charity gave Charity a little piece for her friend. And they also made chalice covers. So usually there was some religious symbol, Bible, a chalice, church. These were usually a little wider than your regular bookmarks, and they were on a longer ribbon. But that was something they did with paper. And then this is just a little, could have been a bookmark, could have been something. But they did little small pieces. The Victorians in England loved their stamps. They had like a stamp fetish. And of course, Queen Victoria's face was on the stamp. And you'll often find stamp holders. And in England, letters find no grace unless they bear Victoria's face to guard her head from dust or damps. This case provides for postage stamps. And so there's two sides of these little pieces, except for this one. This one's a little different. And inside, you usually find a little paper envelope that is still with the case. You can pull it out, and often there's stamps in there. And then when Queen Victoria died, somebody decided to make a commemorative sampler of her stamps on perforated paper. So they really had an obsession over stamps, and paper was a great these little pieces were a great way to store your stamps. I remember I told you you can do things with paper you can't do with fabric or canvas. So lace work is the process of creating a pattern that looks like lace. And you can do this by cross-stitching the pattern or by cutting away the paper. And you can see the cross in the middle, the paper has been cut away, and here the paper has been stitched. Same pattern, different means to achieve that. And you could only do this on with perforated paper. It was so popular that Seju, who offered a lot of little stitching books in the mid to late 1800s, also had a little pattern book for lace work. And you can see here some examples. A lot of the lacework pieces were bookmarks because the patterns in it were conducive to having a square or a rectangle. And again, here's the front and back of the stamp case. More lacework bookmarks. I love these. I mean, I'm a lacework collector, so I like to find anything in any shape I can get. But if you make a mistake, all bets are off because you can't go back and fix it. So you had to be very patient and very careful. And sometimes these were cut out with a penknife. I don't know how sharp their scissors were. They probably did have some, but it was a very tedious process to do this. More lacework pieces. This is your bird. I don't know, Shirley, if you told them what's coming with this or not, but this is the bird. And he is a Berlin work parrot, and they've used the lacework in this design to do the background. So this is not cut away, this is stitched. He was done with silk, I think, and he's just stunning. Everybody loves him. This is a little needle book. So again, here's the front and the back. Lacework's a little fragile, depending on where it is. And this is a mourning sampler for a mom who lost 2 daughters and then she died. And probably it was her mother, the grandmother of the grandmother of the daughters, who did this as a way to commemorate the loss in the family. I've never seen a full sampler done with this, but you can see from looking at that how effective that patterning can be. And then of course the Victorians love stickers. So you know, paperwork is great to put stickers on, so you have to add a sticker now and again. A lot of times perforated paper, work that is done on perforated paper is called Berlin work. And I'm going to argue that that's not true, that is not the case. Berlin work, if you're needle pointers, you know that Berlin work referred basically to the patterns and the materials that came from Germany, is my understanding. But you could do that on canvas, and you could also do it on paper, but not every piece of thing stitched on perforated paper used a Berlin work pattern, nor was it done in wool. So a lot of times you have the crossover that people will say, well, it's Berlin, you know, if you Google Berlin work, sometimes you'll come up with stuff that's related to perforated paper. However, these 2 flowers are done on paper, these 2 pieces, and you can tell they were probably Berlin work patterns because it's just that type. This was done on paper with wool, same thing. This was probably a pattern. But my personal opinion is they're different. It's not the same thing. But in the style of Berlin work, these were some of the florals that I own. All of these pieces are in my collection. So, and you can see that there's just some stunning pieces. These are all done in wool. Some of these are done in long stitch. This is done in like a satin stitch, long stitch. They weren't all done in cross stitch or half cross. You can see the florals up close. You could, as with anything, you were able to stitch however your abilities are is what you could bring to your canvas or to your project. And so these two pieces, I've just given you a close-up of the flower parts of them, obviously were done by people who liked to stitch and had some technique and had some experience. Because you've got this one's a little plainer, and this one has more textured stitches. It's got beads. It has all sorts of stuff in here. Another thing that was popular as far as sort of a Berlin work type thing were buildings. They were popular to do. They could be a real place, or they could be from the imagination of the stitcher. This is John Wesley's tomb. This is on like 24, 26 hole paper. It looks like it's pin and inked on, but it's not, it's stitched. And you can see these have more of a needlepoint type feel because you have French knots, you have different textured stitches. Same thing with this. This was a summer, somebody invited the kids to a summer house, and this was probably a thank you present for being invited to spend the summer with a family. And here's a close-up of one of the houses, the row houses. What people think is they go, oh, it's paper, it must be schlocky, or they must not have put any effort into it. When you see these pieces, no matter what the ground material is, they put as much effort into it as they wanted to or as they could put into it. And sometimes people miss this because they say, oh, it's done on paper, we don't care. But, you know, look at this. Paper samplers are unique in that they're not printed. Everyone is unique like a fabric sampler, but they're rarer than the fabric samplers because most of the samplers were stitched on fabric and not as many were stitched on paper. Paper did come in bigger sizes. This one is 17 inches by 21 inches. You can see your sort of traditional sampler parts here. And this is a freehand embroidery, surface embroidery of the church, which we think was her dad's church in New Hampshire. The thing you could do with paper is you could draw on it and then cover it over if you wanted to. So it gave you some options. She didn't finish this, but she did a great job with what she did. And here she is. This is our stitcher, Adelphia Kisa Hodge. She married Luther Lindsay Todd. They had one daughter. Well, they had a daughter, Belle Lutheran Todd. And they were in the Seattle area, and they showed this sampler at a, I think it was a Daughters of the Revolution. They showed it at an event before 1942. And this picture here is their daughter. And I ended up with this sampler. They were selling it. I was able to buy it. And they sent me the newspaper article and some of the family history, which is really nice. And they were happy that it was going to somebody who, you know, would appreciate it. So, and sometimes like, it's just really fun to be able to find the people behind it. Traditional American samplers. The one on the left is a New Jersey sampler, and I love the saying in that because it has knowledge is power, 1850. And then this little one is fun, even though it has a couple of chunks out of it, 1851. Very traditional sampler style. Again, these are paper pieces, Sarah Curtis. Did a lot of scripture, a lot of religious things they stitched. It was the culture, and it was what they were encouraged to stitch. Boys actually also stitched on samplers. You will find more samplers stitched by boys on paper than you will find stitched by boys on fabric. And there's a couple of other collectors out there, and we sort of agree on this because we think the boys, it is easier for them to work with paper than it was to work with fabric. So often you will see, you don't see as many as you do for the girls, but you will find some stitched by boys on paper, and these are 3 of them. And Charles Floyd in the middle was the oldest of 10 kids, and I think, and he stitched his sampler in 1856. They came from Massachusetts, ended up coming to, they came to, I think, where did I say? They came to San Diego. They came to your area, and they became fruit farmers. And he ended up, he married, had 1 daughter who became a teacher who never married. And it's really fun to have his sampler. And I ended up with it. I don't remember exactly how I ended up with it, but it was once sold by Finkel and Daughter. So you never know where you're going to find it. But he became an agricultural inspector in San Diego. They came west after the Civil War. English samplers tend to have everything in it and the kitchen sink. The American ones are a little bit more spread out. English samplers, like some of the school samplers you see in England, they stuff everything in there that they can. Maggie Hastie did the sampler on the right for her grandmother's friend, Mrs. Fletcher. And you can see there's just lots of fun colors done by kids. If you flip these over on the back, the front is a little bit more, more faded, but the back, very vibrant colors. Emma Turtle is actually the first paper sampler I bought. I bought her a long time ago, and the person I bought her from asked me if I wanted to know what the price was, and I said, no, I just wanted a paper sampler, so send it to me. And she wasn't very much in today's money, but Emma Turtle, I also have been able to find her family and her history. And the one on the right, W. Foles, I think there was a man who stitched this. I don't know why, but it's talking about, though you have oceans far to cross with billows rolling high, the God who holds them in his hand will to you then be nigh. And fear and be not my parents dear, but shortly come away. The happiness you will find here will more than all repay. So I think somebody did that. It might not have been a guy. It just feels like it might have been a man to me. But you have different styles. School samplers, there aren't very many samplers that are related to specific schools. I mean, you find that more in fabric, you find it in the Quaker and the Bristol and other schools. These 2 were not bought together. One is 1866 and 1877, but you can see looking at them how similar they are. And this was also, again, you have areas of satin stitch, different textured stitches. They were either done from a pattern or it was done from a school, but we don't know. But I was happy to end up with both of these because, you know, my mother had a saying, if 1 is good, 3 is better. So if I can find something similar in the same thing, that's always fun because, again, we learn by seeing. This is the only school sampler that I have found, and it's Emma McPherson, and it's this Sisters of Presentation Convent School, 1862, and it's rare for several reasons. One, it's has the school name on it. It is a little on the early side. It's 1862, and it's in San Francisco. Now you remember when people came west, they brought the pots and pans, and they left the good stuff in the Midwest or in the East Coast. So this was really the Wild West. And these sisters established a school in San Francisco in 1859. There were 4 Irish nuns that came over and established this school, and they taught children of miners, immigrants, and the poor. So finding something with a school name on it in 1862 from San Francisco, I used to be a California girl, so that was just a rare treat. So this is a sampler documented to a school, worked on paper. There's also different types of samplers, commemorative samplers. This is Mennonite, Pennsylvania Dutch, Catherine Sarah King. She stitched a sampler to honor her 25th anniversary in 1851, and then a sampler for her first grandchild in 1856. The colors on these are unusual. They look very similar to what you actually see. And you can see she's from Pennsylvania, very Pennsylvania Dutch colors and motifs. And there she is. She was raised as a Mennonite. She married a widower and went on to have 9 more kids with him. So this is unusual. And both of these samplers stayed together, which was fun. This is done in wool. Variegated wool, different stitches. Birthday samplers, they stitch them for like birth samplers and commemorative samplers. Again, the one on the left is another lacework piece. They can be, you know, simple or more ornate. The one on the right, this one's sort of fun because all of these are not, these are just done with long straight stitches. So they did the body of the designs with long straight stitches. And the fun thing about that is the stitches are still in place. And sometimes after a while they spring out, and they didn't. Catherine Dorothy Emma Mings, very long name for a little girl. She ended up, for whatever reason, living with her great aunts. Her mother had lived with these same 2 aunts before she married. And there were other kids in the family. For whatever reason, Catherine went to live with her aunts. Her aunt Dorothy Smith stitched this sampler. It's like a commemorative baptism sampler. And the aunts were both lace makers. So you can see around this sampler, there's pieces of lace, probably one or both aunts made. This is the church where she was baptized. And this is a tintype of the church. And Catherine ended up being a lace maker when she was older. So that was fun. You can find the sampler here done on paper, enough information here that you can find them. And that's just a fun thing. Mourning samplers, again, the Victorians, after they finished collecting stamps, were very into mourning. And so they did a lot of mourning samplers and jewelry and other things. And I know from my own experience that stitching helps you work through grief. And so they did a lot of commemorative samplers for people who had passed. And these are a few examples. This one here is not stitched, but again, here's that punched work that we looked at early on in the early bookmarks. And they did a lot of things to tribute to the dead. This is what I call the pipes cleaner samplers. This is real dried flowers that have been put on here. Somebody's probably son passed away, and they did these with something, it's really close to a pipe cleaner, and then they did an overlay stitch to put that on, to attach that to the paper. You see these more in commercial pieces that were done for tourists, but you don't see them as much in mourning samplers.
Claudia, we have some questions. You want to answer them now? Or at the end of
we
the
can if
presentation?
you want.
Okay.
Do you want me to look?
Yes, why don't you look in the chat? There's about
Okay.
2 or 3 questions there.
All right. Let's go back here. Where do I find my pieces? Anywhere. I mean, wherever I can. eBay, different collectors, different auctions. Some of the needle books, somebody said, were the needle books used? Some of them were, some of them were not. I think with us, we tend to stitch projects, and then sometimes we'll use them, or sometimes we'll say, oh, I did that, and you'll sort of park them and keep them. But I wouldn't use an antique piece. I think it's just to be looked at and be pretty. They do look like hardanger, and you're going to see more of that a little bit later. You're going to see some different things. Okay, I think that's everybody we got. All right. Yeah, mourning samplers again. Oops, gotta click back on that thing. All right. And sometimes they would copy from each other. So these are also mourning samplers. These came from a charity shop in Australia. And you can see this one is bigger with 24 hole paper. It's a bigger piece. This one's a little more clunky. These were probably done about 25 years apart. And this was in the family, and somebody took part of this to do this one. And the big one starts out, there are 3 graves not far away, 3 graves covered clay, and underneath those clay bank, my dearest children lays. And they did the same thing as a commemorative sampler. So it's fun that they actually stayed together because they were from the same family. We don't actually know who it was, but they did copy from each other. They did use needlework sometimes to take a pattern, take a design, take something from. Hair samplers to go with the morning ones were very popular. I call them hairballs, and I do not like them. So that means more for somebody else. So that's okay with me. This one is pretty. We don't know who she was, but her little pretty blonde hair. This is James We Bloom to Die, and here's James's hair. James E. Mountain died May the 11th, 1862. His aching head is at rest. So we don't quite know what happened to him, but somebody commemorated him. And then this one is not a hairball sampler, but it looks like it. These are just long pieces of wool that have been made to look like a weeping willow. And it's amazing that this is all together too, because this is pretty chunky and pretty disgusting, actually. Just my opinion. The mottos are something you're probably more familiar with. You're probably familiar with the bookmarks and the mottos. The mottos were sometimes called door sayings because of their size. They were about the size of a transom window. So a lot of times people would put them over a door because it was a good place to see them. They were designed to have a word of encouragement or a scripture. They were usually put in a prominent place in the home where they could be seen and read every day. I have one that says, turn sinners lest ye burn. I didn't put that one in here, but you get the idea that somebody wanted you to see that. So that was an important way. And the mottos were, that was the purpose. They were done on, usually with wool, usually with a textured stitch, and usually a half cross stitch or a satin stitch. And they were done on different colors of paper also. There were several standard sizes of mottos. Most of the ones you see are the rectangular ones. So there's 10 by 21, 9 by 12, 16 by 21. I see this one, economy is wealth. My husband hopes I will actually read it. I see it every day, but so far, I don't think I've changed. So, but economy is wealth was another one to get you to encourage you. You can see how they were done, which I think is sort of fascinating as stitchers. This is the same saying, simply to thy cross I cling. The top one is designed by Emil Crezand. It has long straight lines and you would stitch over the lines. This is when the paper had 14, 15 holes per inch and you could print on it. So by mid 1870s, they were printing designs on the paper. This was mass produced. There were probably kits available because I've seen enough designs with the same types of threads and colors to say there were, but I haven't found something together that's got all the kit parts. But there were 2 styles. One of them was where you had these long lines, and then the bottom one, you can see in this blow up of it, it was printed with symbols today that we would sort of associate with a cross stitch chart. So there were several ways to do that. He shall give his angels charge over thee. This is one of the first mottos I bought that got me interested in this. And you can see the unstitched version and then the stitched version where part of the thread has rotted away, which is interesting to me because then I got to see what was underneath it. Most American mottos were stitched with wool or cotton. And there was variegated wool in 1875. People will tell me there wasn't, but yes, there was. By 1880, there was a style of motto being printed that could stand on its own, meaning you didn't have to be a great stitcher. You could just fill in the blanks or leave it. And these are some examples of that, where the whole paper, the whole piece of paper was printed on, and you could do just the words. You could take a shot at the flowers. You could do as little or as much as you wanted to. These are done on paper. Sometimes like a really fine needlepoint canvas, it's a shame to stitch over it because you'll never get all the detail in the print. So this is what's referred to as the fishing girl. She's new. She's not in great shape, but we haven't seen her before. So the basket girl, and then this one. This one is not stitched, and this one is not stitched. But all three are printed on paper in full color. And I wouldn't want to stitch over them because they're really pretty as is. You didn't have to do it as is if you decided to work a design. This is a great example. The top canvas, the top paper shows you what it was, and the bottom on the right shows you what they did. So they obviously made the house their house. They changed it a bit. They took out some of the details. They took out the people. You could make the design your own. So everybody started with this. What you ended up with was what you could do and what you wanted to do. Again, remember I told you if one is good, three is better. So this is the same design done three different ways. So the one on the left is on plain paper with mostly like a half cross stitch with no embellishment. The one in the middle is done with straight stitches. And a lot of times people didn't like the look of paper. So what they did is this person took black wool and they made long, straight stitches across the whole back of the paper to cover the paper. They also used to put tin foil behind it. You can see tin foil behind this one so that it masked the holes in the paper because they were trying to make it look more expensive. This person is a free spirit. They had a fun time with a bunch of silk. So you might look at this and these three, you know these two are the same, but you might not be able to tell that one's the same, but it's the same design. So again, if one is good, three is better. There's a lot of house blessings. There's a lot of religious pieces. God bless our home, home sweet home. A lot of, remember the positive slant on they wanted God's blessing on their house. And again, here's stickers. Remember I told you Victorians like stickers. So here's the stickers on the God bless our home, the big one on the right. There were mottos based on song titles and hymns. Dwight L. Moody and Ira Sankey did a crusade through the US and England, late 1800s. These are their pictures that were printed on there. HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan. Grandfather's clock stopped running when the old man died. Cheery motto. And the old armchair, my mother, she loved that old armchair. She died there in that old armchair. Another winning saying. If you look at the songs behind some of these, you just have to sort of shake your head and go, okay. And Rock of Ages is pretty safe because it's just a regular hymn. Masonic mottos, there were different Masonic pieces with some of the symbolism of the Masons. This one was one that was completely printed and then it was filled in as they wanted to. This is Friendship, Love, and Truth. This is actually, these colors are this bright. When I owned a needlework shop, this honesty, industry, and sobriety I put it over my door of my shop and I told people it was my security camera. So there were a bunch of those. Mottos commemorating the end of the Civil War. The centennial was 1876. This was still fairly new and very popular to have mottos, things printed on paper. So we had a lot of, there were a lot of patriotic mottos printed. And this, what we could do with paper, it says, insert General Grant's picture here. You could cut out the shape and put a picture of General Grant here. Again, Lincoln, malice toward none, charity toward all, Lincoln's motto. Remember the bookmarks that they had the bottom that was torn off and the top you stitched on? This is the same thing for the centennial mottos. You did the top, and then at the bottom, this came as one piece, and then they had a picture of one of the buildings of the fair. A lot of times you'll see half of this, you won't see the bottom half, so to have them together is good. Again, this is another centennial motto. You know it was sold at the fair because it's got the building. This has the 13 original states around the outside edge. More patriotic mottos. There's a whole bunch of collectors that fight over these because they're Philadelphia centennial pieces. I just like them because they're paper. Again, lots of textured stitches in this. Lots of textured stitches. Morning mottos, again, we had morning samplers, we had morning hairballs, we had all of that. So morning mottos were printed. These were printed and you could fill them in. We Mourn Our Loss was printed and never stitched. Again, where these little oval things are, you could put pictures of your loved ones in there. Came with something printed, but they were intended to be cut out, and you could put your loved one's picture in there. English mottos, they were popular in the UK as well, so were the bookmarks. They were little different sizes. Most of the mottos from England were done with silk. Again, whoever was stitching, you worked with what you had available to you. And silk was much more available in England and Scotland than it was in the United States, or it was much more popular. Or maybe it was more affordable, I don't know. But a lot of the English mottos are done in silk, different hole count and slightly different size and different styles. What I call these are Sunday school mottos. These were made for children to be stitched. There was a whole group of these from the UK. Most of the mottos were stitched by kids. They were stitched by invalids. They were stitched by somebody who had time to do them. Scottish ones, certain style. You can see there's different styles from different places. There were mottos, not everything was in English. There was a lot in German, there was in French, there were different, I've seen them in in Italian and other languages. This is one that was not stitched. This is a Parker's patent motto, it was printed. Again, this is one of the pipe cleaner mottos, so the things were sort of three-dimensional and tacked down on top of it. There were mottos stitched with beads. Mill Hill is not doing anything new. They were stitching using beads on paper in the 1880s, 1890s. This one on the left is done on wool, same piece. I blew this one up a little bit so you could see it. This was done in beads, all done in beads. Thou Art My Hope. This sort of has a Hardanger feel to the edge because somebody said they look a little like Hardanger. This is all done in beads. She doesn't photograph well, but if you see her in person, she's just sort of really stunning. She has these big chunky beads on here and the stitching for the leaves. And then somebody decided, oh, well, I don't have to cut this as a square, so I can cut out a decorative edge. So they did a decorative edge for her. And you could do things on paper again that you couldn't do on fabric or canvas. And this is Thou Art My Hope, and this whole cross in the middle is done with crystal beads. Just a regular motto, but they did something special in the middle. You know, collectors find interesting things. And perforated paper was a very common fabric. It was easily available. It came in different hole sizes. but you could make lots of fun things with it. And sometimes they made some unusual things. They made mobiles, they made baskets, they did a lot of different things, but this was probably the most unusual thing I've seen. This is a waste paper basket. It's 7 hole per inch paper that's been dyed silver, been painted silver, done with wool. So the wool's eating away a little bit, still on its wooden base and with its tin liner, and the initials on it is B. So we affectionately call this BU because it really is but ugly. And only a collector would love this. And I'm sure the person that sold it to me on eBay was very, very happy when I bought this. But this is so unusual because it's a great example of what was done with perforated paper. So I don't really have a favorite piece, but like I say in here, I can tell you all the weird ones. And this is a weird one. And I've never seen it in a garbage can made out of paper, but I'm glad this one is being kept safe. And you can see somebody put some work into this because originally it had some ribbon, some silk ribbon and all sorts of fun things. But my husband sort of rolled his eyes when this came in. But there's also shelf bracket. There's all sorts of stuff that's out there. How do you stitch on it? You had to stitch flat, you couldn't roll it. Same thing with today. This woman on the right is, to me, obviously stitching on paper. If she was stitching on canvas, she would have had a roller bar. If she was stitching on a sampler, she might have been holding it in hand, and a fabric sampler has to be paper because nothing else you can work with is that flat. There is a frame that is not available anymore. It has my name on it. It's called the Dutch tree frame. It does come with flat clamps, and you can put work paper on this. But you can also work it where you sit it in front of your computer. You can put it under your computer keyboard. You can use frame weights like you would look on a canvas. You can put it on stretcher bars. There's all sorts of things you can do, but you can't roll it. You need to leave it flat when you work on it. I just want to do a little plug for me. I have done some motto adaptations. There's a free thing of the Bristol ornaments on my website on dutchtreat.com. You can look and see if any of those interest you. These are some of the mottos that I've adapted for stitching for today's stitcher. It's been fun. It's a fun thing to do. I do it in cross stitch and I do it in the Victorian textured stitches. So I charted 2 different ways. So when I do a piece, this is charted for perforated paper. So you're actually going to count the holes you stitch over and you're going to do a long stitch. When you're doing for cross stitch, you're just doing your regular stitch with a, per a symbol. Charted both ways. I think Shirley, I don't know if these are projects that you have are going to have access to. So this is the bird and the bookmark. So I don't know if you told them or not, but Shirley has the PDFs.
Oh, hi, I'm on here.
Yeah.
Yes, well, yes, I did send out the lacework Berlin work parrot.
Okay.
Let me ask, I'm getting a lot of text messages from a few colleagues. Can you quite stop, please? Because it's appearing on the recording of the Zoom. So we could wait until afterwards. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
so,
well, we're at the end.
Oh, okay, great.
So
in any case, thank you very much for the presentation. Oh, are you not done yet?
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. All right. So we do have a few more questions.
Okay.
Here, if you want to take a look, Claudia.
Okay.
Oh, Pamela Harding says, it's a pleasure to meet you. She has many of your items sent to her to sell their stash, mostly tabletoppers.
Good.
And in case she wants to let you know, she's quite impressed with perforated paper.
Okay.
Okay. And then let's see. I think Marianne wants to know, in your opinion, what is the most durable thread made today to stitch a sampler that will last?
I have no idea. Just stitch with whatever you like.
Okay.
I mean, it probably, if you're talking about a sampler on paper, you can use silk on it, you can use wool, you can use cotton. How it lasts, we have to me today, Our threads are much more sturdy in a way than 100 years ago.
Mhm.
So how your sampler lasts depends on what happens to it. Did you frame it? Did you throw it in a drawer? Did you do whatever?
Mhm.
So I don't have a favorite.
Okay, does anyone have another question they want to ask Claudia? Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Claudia. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.
And yeah,